I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to the conversation with Al McFarlane. I'm glad to be here and glad to have you along as well. Today's program is a special program. I'm talking with an author, a media person, and a person who's done phenomenal work in the industry over a long period of time. I'm looking forward to this conversation with Kevin Taylor. Kevin E. Taylor is a seasoned writer and producer for television. He's written 10 books, including 4 novels and 5 empowerment tomes, and his autobiography. He works in public health through LGBTQ services and development in Newark, New Jersey, and he is senior pastor of Unity Fellowship Church, Newark, where he is now bishop-elect with the nation's oldest affirming denomination in the LGBTQ African American community. He's a parent of an amazing son and a grandparent of 3. He's currently working on Mama Please. That's his latest novel. So, Brother Kevin, Reverend Kevin, Pastor Kevin, good to see you. Welcome to the conversation.
It'll be good to be your brother for this conversation. So
there we go.
All the other times you sit over here. I appreciate it. Because I might go some places that might be uncomfortable for people with the pastor. So let's talk about love and romance and struggles and stuff.
There we go. Well, let's go wherever the Spirit takes us. Is cool with me too. I'm just interested in getting a sense of your career and your path in television. Walk us through where you've come from, where you've gone, and where you are now in the communications producing world.
It's so interesting because when you talk about television, as you know, you've done television, you do media, you do publishing. People always make it seem like this behemoth that you can't get into. You got to know somebody. I came into BET as a temp after having worked in the DC government for 8.5 years, and just kind of got to that point where I was 26, and they were like, since I've been there since I was 17, I hit that roadblock where it was just kind of like, you're only going to make these small steps until you get about 35. And I was like, you mean sit still for the next decade and just be satisfied? And so I left, went to a temp agency. That temp agency sent me to a management firm, then to ABC News. And ABC News wanted to send me back to London to bring one of their correspondents back, because I had done my junior year of college in London. And I thought, oh my God, I get to go back to London and somebody else has died. And literally, King, just as I was about to hang up the phone, Al, they said, oh, and there's also, the temp agency said, oh, and there's also a position available at BT. I'm sorry, wait, what? And so I was like, I'll take that. And so Monday I went into BET, and they always said on temp gigs, bring your resume. Tuesday, I sat down with the director of music programming, the wonderful Miss Lydia and Cole. She asked me in conversation, we interviewed for about 45 minutes. Then she asked me if I had any questions. I looked at her nameplate and said, yes, ma'am, I have one question. What does your middle initial stand for? She said, that's quite an odd question. I said, I know, but God said if your middle name is Natalie, then I'd be working for Lydia Natalie Cole, and Natalie Cole's my favorite singer, and I'd be looking at the sign of whether or not I'm supposed to be here, and that's my sign. And she says, wow, you actually believe that? I said, I do indeed. She said, I am Lydia Natalie Cole. And that's what it was. Amazing. Right. The funny thing is, when most women get married, their last name becomes their new middle initial. But she liked Natalie so much, she kept it. Yeah. And a year later, she, after being her assistant, I type 103 words a minute. I'm 25 at the time, but I'm an assistant. I've been in the government. So I've done a 125-page budget justification on a Saturday, and so she would ask for reports and stuff, and I'd have them done by 10, 11 o'clock. And she's like, I feel like I'm going to lose you because your brain moves so fast. What will it take to keep you? And I showed her the job description for the music researcher / record label liaison. And she said, oh, well, we haven't filled that position. This is 92 at the time. She said, we haven't filled that position because they were worried about payola. You get the videos in, you send the playlist out. But as your executive assistant, I do this anyway. She's like, well, why did nobody ever notice that? So she went to her boss and got me all the money I had lost in leaving the government coming there. I got it back. She went on maternity leave the next year. You asked about how I got into production. And a woman by the name of Cindy Mahmood, now Cindy Lee, she was the new senior vice president of entertainment and programming. And, first she was told you can't work, you're not going to be able to trust Kevin because he was so loyal to Lydia. I gave her all of my boss's numbers and was like, I'm loyal to people, period. Mm-hmm. Here are all my boss's home numbers that I still have. And so that woman says, I'm going to like you. And then along came an opportunity to do an interview, and this is 93 now, with Natalie Cole, because she hadn't been able to interview with BET because Natalie released Unforgettable on Sunday, and on Father's Day, she was on the road. There, anybody that did interviews with her basically had to join her, but she really hit the road. And so coming back, she's like, I owe BET an interview. And she said, go home and write questions for Natalie Cole. And I was like, oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. And so the next day, she goes, Natalie Cole was the first Black artist to win Best New Artist. Natalie Cole speaks German. Natalie Cole, was going to be a doctor. Oh, she says, I've decided who's doing the interview. And, we're old enough. I was like, Natalie Cole and Donnie Simpson going to be beautiful television. She said, you. And I was like, oh my God, for what? She said, I don't know. I said, for what show? She said, I don't know. Create it. And I created a show called Lyrically Speaking. Huh. I walked in the room and Natalie kissed me thinking like, oh, my fan is here. She's like, I'm doing an interview. And I said, me. She said, oh, hell no. And I was like, uh-oh, there it is. I've been at BET 3 years. Here comes imposter syndrome. And she saw it on my face. And she said, no, baby. You know more. You have forgotten more about me than I'll remember. I said, oh, no, I'm fine. I'll walk you through there. And she said, walk me. Did y'all hear what he said? And so literally, I did the interview with Natalie Cole for a show that I created called Lyrically Speaking. Natalie hit the air when Luther's Songs album came out. Luther said, I want to do that show. Luther begat Anita Baker. Anita Baker begat Lena Horne. Lena Horne, I did Patti LaBelle and Stevie Wonder in the same week.
Everything connected, everything linked.
And then Tina Turner, and I went to Germany with her team to see her in concert, and then we interviewed in Copenhagen, Denmark. And then there I've done Diana Ross and, young artists like Brandy and DMX and B2K and Tony, worked with Tony Braxton, helped to, literally helped to put Maxwell's name on the map because it couldn't, that 96 window when Neo Soul first came in, they really were having problems trying to get him out there. So they were trying to put him on a college tour. And one of the entertainment producers was playing Urban Hang Suite. Now, I was at my desk like, what is that? He was like, want to listen to it? Went back to my desk and I drove people insane. I was like, this is the greatest thing I've heard in so long. I called the label and said, are there any videos? And they're like, sure. First I asked for a copy of the album. Then, then I said, wait, are there any videos? And, we started playing Till the Cop Comes Knocking in top 20 when Maxwell hadn't even broken the top 70 yet. And then Don't Ever Wonder came out and we made a superstar. So to play, to have had the opportunity.
And that song is still boss. Don't Ever Wonder, man. Yeah. I find myself listening to that every week, a couple of times a week.
Next year for Valentine's Day, he's doing an Urban Hang Suite cruise. Him, Madison, Leland James. He's taking a bunch of artists on, and I think I might have to go. That album, Whenever, Wherever, Whatever is the greatest. And I'm putting that up there with Inseparable by Natalie Cole and It Knocks Me Off My Feet by Stevie. It's in its simplicity and its lyrics literally was the first song in a long time to break me down to tears. And if there's a thing that you need for you and your blood, I will bleed.
Here we go. Listen, describe BET. Where was it in its emergence and development when you arrived, and where was it when you left? It went through some major changes, but obviously had always been a pioneering institution in our community and in the world. So describe, the BET that you were looking at from outside when you got the call, and how it looked when you got in there.
This little kid from DC knows about BET in DC because I was like, this is the TV with the first video played. And I remember being in a production meeting, and they're like, what was the first song that played on BET? And I said, it was Earth, Wind & Fire song. And they were like, we'll check research. I said, I promise you. We were sitting in darkness, and at 8 p.m. it started. I can guarantee, I can tell you what I had on. So BET was at 1899 9th Street Northeast in DC. If you ever take the Amtrak from like New York to DC to Union Station, you pass BET's corporate headquarters, and operations network. At the time, so this is 91. BET was across from the main post office. It was one of those, things kind of off in the industrial area of DC, New York Avenue, off New York Avenue. And what it was, I was trying to explain BET to people. It was a kind of pared down, not so slick boomerang. Remember that? Because first floor was where the production suite, all the production happened downstairs. So when you came in, you would come down the ramp into the studio. So if you were upstairs, you were in the offices where the SVPs were, where the producers were writing stuff. And BET at the time, because we were such a monolith and such a titan for people. People in our industry literally only came to DC for BET. So they were both artists like Genuine, like Maxwell, like SWV, like Natalie Cole. They were both the artists and in the culture. So after they finished interviews, I'll be sure Christopher Williams and Mary J. Blige, Vanessa Williams wanted to tour the building because they were like, hi. So you'd be at your desk typing and look up and be like, well, hi. And the label rep would say, hey, want you to meet my new artist? Or, Vanessa Williams just wanted to say hey to everybody.
Wow. Wow.
Because when Vanessa Williams, the recording artist, came, she still had been Miss Vanessa Williams, former Miss America. So it was just that. It was, it was somebody screaming over there. When was Aretha Frank? When did Aretha Franklin record Respect? April 1967. And they would be like, Kevin, why do you know that stuff? And I was like, well, don't y'all know it? But literally being a music researcher, I didn't realize, everybody was so independently and on their own that understand. Like under my desk right now, I have a full trunk of all of my Natalie Cole memorabilia because we'll talk about that later. But as a younger Black man, I had like old Ebony's, old Jess, old Sepias, old Black Stars. I just had them and so when I got to BET and got the researcher position, I literally spent the first 2 or 3 weekends dismantling my magazines and like, okay, Janet Jackson, Michael Jackson, Mary J. Blige, because they didn't have files on artists. And I was like,
right.
I don't need these magazines sitting in a dentist's office or somewhere else when they could be of service to the community. And so it was just that though. People hollering over things and people touring the building, us engaging, and it was Friday afternoons we would sit kind of, so where we going to dinner? You know what I mean? Came a point when on every other Friday was payday, and those alternating Fridays in the summer they did a barbecue. So we would get off at 3 o'clock and all be outside with a catered lunch. It was just
what was the business of BET like at the time when you came in there? Still innovative.
Yeah, BET
moving in a territory that we hadn't really been in.
At BET, by the time I got there, it had already been in like 55 million households. And in my tenure, we went from 55 to 100. I matriculated from DC to New York, in 2000 to do that. So when I left BET formally, I was a senior supervising producer of series and specials. And so I came to help, to help establish the space, help them with the final, because when I got there, Free had already been hired, and we were doing the last candidates for her co-star. We had kind of a DJ from Houston, New York model, and then this kind of promoter dude. And the model just didn't do well. The DJ was fighting with her, trying to get, because he was almost her size. He was fighting with her for airspace. So I went to this other guy and I was like, I want you to be her ex-boyfriend. Y'all are still cool. You're still hanging in the same social circles. There's nothing but love. And, but you're just not together anymore. So when AJ was reading with him, he would hold on to her and bounced around her. And then when he finished one of the shoots, he picked her up and she screamed and they went off. And they were like, where did they get this chemistry? And I'm like, I could see it in them. And so, and then so when we did 106 in Park, if we want to talk about that later, 106 in Park was a completely different, because we're in New York now. We would be in New York and people don't believe that those surprise appearances, like Jennifer Lopez came by once, Bobby and Whitney, Brandy, that when they came by, they literally had come to do something else and be like, no, before I leave here, I'm by BET because 106 in Park is on. But 106
was Donnie already gone at that time?
Oh yeah. So let's roll back. Donnie had done 85 to 95, 80 to 90.
Okay.
Yeah. And then
and Ed Gordon and Donnie kind of the same genre.
Right. Ed lasted a little longer. Ed got taken by CNN. And Donnie, one of the things that I'm very proud of, Al, is kind of Donnie's tenure with Video Soul just ended. And I was like, damn, we're not going to do any kind of surprise, any kind of celebration of this flagship show. Because I'll say this, one of the first things that happened when I got to BET in March of 91, I was like, we were in a meeting. I was like, what are we doing for Black Music Month? And they were like, we are Black music. We don't usually stop. And so I was like, oh, no, we got to do something. They were like, got any ideas? And I was like, let's do Diva Week. Because I remember seeing Ed Bradley do a profile with Lena Horne on 60 Minutes. And she got this long, 20-minute piece. And I thought it was really cool. But then somebody like a Barbara Streisand got the whole show on something else. I was like, no, how Barbara Streisand get the whole show, but not Lena Horne. And so when I in my little self, when I came up with Diva Week, I was like, I'd like to see each of those Black women who are the heart and soul of Black music get their flowers. So we brought them on, gave them flowers, and then did a whole hour of just them. And we've done some lengthy interviews before, but to do the whole hour. So we had Patty, Gladys, Shaka, Diana Ross, which is a very big deal.
Oh boy.
And then I had to have a debate with my boss about Phyllis Hyman. I was like, what? And so luckily Phyllis was in concert. She and her husband and I went to see Phyllis Hyman. And she came through the smoke with Living All Alone and whistled during, she came through the smoke through What You Won't Do for Love, and then whistled the bridge of Living All Alone. And I screamed out, call the birds home. Because she whispered like an instrument. And my boss leaned over and said, go backstage and book her, please. And so being able to do those moments, and it's like, Donnie was a part of all of those. Janet Jackson coming by the surprise, and Diana Ross, coming for that time. And then she, when she came that time, Diana Ross for Diva Week came in a black, one piece and a sweater, and her hair was flat. She went across the street to McDonald's to get her kids lunch because we did fancy food for her. And she's like, the kids saw the McDonald's. They don't want anything else. And I had to run over like security because she was just going to go over by herself. And I was like, why you not going to the McDonald's by yourself? So we did all of that. And then Donnie gets nothing. So at the end of the millennium, Stephen Hill from MTV is now our president of music. And Stephen says, look, I want to do something big. And so we notarized the top 100 videos of the 20th century. And literally all day from 11 to 11 on New Year's Day, down. The hardest shoot to date, and I've done some serious shoots, the hardest shoot in my life to date, because what Stephen had wanted was take the 12 talent and give somebody hour 1, hour 2, hour 3, hour 4. And all I could think of, especially when I watched like an MTV, all I could think of, but if you have one talent that somebody doesn't like, they turn the channel. And if you lose them, they may never come back. So the breakneck pace of, I remember this having to be at work for 3 days in a row doing the format for the show, because it was literally, Rachel pitched to 100, and then when you come out of it, it's Sherry Carter who pitches to Hits in the Street, who pitches to the video. You come out of it, there's Big Tigger, and it was like, how do I Soul Train Scramble Boy this? So like when we got to video number 25 or 29, it was The Boy Is Mine by Brandy and Monica, and each of the women said, oh, Cedar, remember? Cedar's World, the animated character was there, and so somebody would say, The Boy Is Mine, and then Sherry would say, no. The boy is mine. And the Lazarus show would say, no, the boy is mine. And then Cedar would go, all y'all can shut up. The boy is mine. So I had to coordinate all 5 of those women, Melanda from BET Next. So it was the most exhausting thing I've ever done. And so it was because people were going crazy. They were like, what the hell is this? Because every time they turned on 2, 3, in any hour, all 12 talent were on the air. And 2 things were our commercial campaign. One was tune in for the top 100 videos of all time. And Thriller is not number 1. And people were like, what? Wait a minute. What? Right? So if you could recall, and I have to bring these 2 together. So that's the moment. And then there's another commercial that says the return of the green-eyed devil, right? Or the green-eyed bandit, or whatever it's Donnie. And so I thought, if they weren't going to pay tribute to Donnie, I will. Everybody mixed it up from 11 to 10. The final hour, however, was Donnie Simpson. He got the top 10 by himself. And so he was like, oh, you don't have to do this. I called him. I was like, Donnie, what's it going to cost me to get you to come on? He's like, no, but here's my feed up. I said, Donnie, what's it going to cost me? Huh? What you mean? Oh, I got to double your fee? What you mean? I got to reach out to your favorite tailor, Edward Hall, and get you a custom suit? What he said, Kevin, I'm not saying it. Okay, whatever it is you want, Daddy. And then when he came in and we did a promo of him kissing babies and people faking, just because it was like giving him.
I love your style. That was brilliant. That's how you do it.
But I'm gonna give Stephen Hill this, right? When Stephen Hill came to me and said the #1 video is not Thriller, he sat with me and I was just kind of like, this. I'm gonna honor Stephen Hill as Black man and innovative thinker to this day. He just told me what it was. He said, "You make it work." So Donnie Simpson comes on after Thriller and says, and we'll be back with the #1 video of the 20th century. He comes back and says the #1 video of the 20th century is not a music video. And then I bring all the talent in. It's a moment captured in time. And all the talent come in. And then Donnie Simpson comes back. Oh, I'm about to cry over this. I'm just proud of it. He says, so ladies and gentlemen, the #1 moment captured on video is the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech in its entirety. Happy New Year. And Donnie, and people telling that they stopped parties at 11 o'clock. And turn the TV up because you always get I have a dream, but one day you get about 30-40 seconds of it. 8 minutes and 26 seconds of of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's entire I Have a Dream speech gave BET its highest day of ratings ever.
Wow, amazing.
The whole day, because we just mixed it up. But to climax it like that, and people were just kind of like, I don't understand how y'all did that. And we ran it. It was so the ratings were so instantly high that we ran it again the next day.
And that connected everything in ways that because we want to separate entertainment and music from the movement sometimes, which we can't and we should not. But this brought it all together and said, here is the analytics.
Yeah.
Right.
And the beauty of that moment, brother, is that you said we talk about bringing it together. When you look on that stage, there's Harry Belafonte, there's Lena Horne, there's Mahalia Jackson, music, Aretha Franklin. Every chance, Dr. King needed her, left tour to join him. So we were all. It's always been that. And so Stephen, he gave me the space to weave it together brilliantly. But the video did it for itself.
Amazing. Let's talk about Kevin E. Taylor as a 5-year-old, as a 4-year-old. When you came into the world and were aware that you existed as a human being, what was the world like? And what were you thinking and dreaming and learning and knowing and becoming as a child?
I have, since I have been called to speak in public space, I have started speeches. I was born a fat, Black, asthmatic, gay nerd in the projects of Southwest DC. And I thought about every one of those things every day of my childhood. What's interesting in a lot of spaces, Brother Al, is that a lot of people, when you say gay, think, but the church and all of that, try being smart in the hood. Try being fat in the hood, right? They both came with their own kind of torturous bullying moments that, that gave birth to rage that I had to get under control because that little boy spoke differently. When I was 7, 8, I think it's somewhere around there. No, it's later than that. I can't. It was 9, 10. I found a dictionary in the trash, and I was a nerd. I liked being in the museum. I liked being in the library. So I found Mama had me take the trash out. I found a little Webster dictionary and just took it home. And I would learn a new word every day. But Lord Kevin would use them. So my brothers acted. I was like, y'all, stop being so recalcitrant. My mother's like, I don't know what that word means, but I don't like it. And I'm 10 years old. I remember saying to my pastor when I was growing up, the way you talk about God, you just make God feel so ubiquitous, like God is everywhere. And he was like, the Taylor. And so that kid was doing that. I don't know if you know anything about. I as far as I know, it's kind of DC and New Orleans have the same reputation. It was DC was humid in the summers in a way that you say the summers in DC's were like breathing down the mouth of a dog. And so oftentimes, because of my asthma, my brothers would go outside. I was one of 8. I found out later because the first child died and we didn't know about it. So you said it was one of 7, and the oldest was a girl. So these 6 boys, and these 4 lived in the house because these 2 were, there's a 10-year gap between Gary and Greg.
Yeah.
So it was Gary, David, and Douglas, and they would run outside and like literally come in drenched. you can't go outside today. And I'd be like, oh man, just because it would be that muggy. And so I stayed in and watched television. And oddly enough, in some of those downtimes when it was just news, I would turn the TV off and interview people on my mama's couch. And so, oddly enough, and you get this as it relates to those kind of moments. My most frequent guest was my favorite singer, Natalie Cole. And so I would often welcome her to the show. So it's only God that my first interview as a professional producer was Natalie Cole. But, that kid stayed in a lot. He was isolated, insulated, learning that I had a gift because those times when you do homework, and mess up the curve because nobody else had done it because some big thing happened on last night, like the Super Bowl. I was like, but we still had this assignment due Monday. And everybody's like, we forgot. And I was like, I ain't forget. And I watched the Super Bowl. So it was just always fighting against the intersectionality of being fat, being black, being a nerd, being, and the being gay was just what I knew. It wasn't anything I'd acted on. My mother asked me when I was 13 if I would ever get married. And I told her, yes, ma'am, when they make it legal. For the longest time, I tried to remember why that came up. But Anita Bryant, who was a former Miss USA, was down in Florida way back in the 70s, like gays are trying to adopt kids, stop them. And so I was reading an article about that. And so when my mother asked me, I was just saying, yeah, as soon as they make it legal. So that was just kind of a construct. The fat I knew, the nerd I knew, gay was something I didn't know yet. And my gay didn't happen until around 15. I stopped being as excited about church as I had been. My mother was a very ardent churchgoer, and a couple of Sundays she would leave early and be in the kitchen cooking, and then notice I wasn't there. And she's like, "Baby, what's wrong?" The pastor I grew up with, who talked about the unconditional love of God, that used to make me weep about God, and died. And this new dude was in. He was in the high potentate rooms and hooping and hollering, and God don't like. And I hadn't heard God not liking anything. I heard God's unconditional love, and Mama said, "Well, come this Sunday, and if he says something, you can just leave." And this time, instead of being in the kitchen, she stayed upstairs with me. I was in the back, because she was up in the mother section.
Yep.
And he saw one of them hooping, hollering in the homo section. My mother looked back and said, "Baby, bye." Bye. Right? Instead of getting up, Baptist church section, row section, instead of getting up and going to the left and coming around the back, I went to the middle and backed out because I was waiting for him to say something. Mom was like, "Baby, bye." Because my mother knew my mouth. My mouth that had been so bullied. I was a big kid, and so I used my mouth as a weapon so that I didn't use my hands because at some point I was fighting with brothers inside the house, just over brothers who we would stair steps, each of us, the four of us, we were 6, 8, 10, 12. We would just stair step, and so doing that and then fighting inside the hood. Now I got to come here and fight. So I learned to back people away from me with my words.
Yeah,
if I had to swing, somebody was going to, and somebody was going to.
Yeah.
My mother backed me up. But here's the glory in the story is I got home that night and I'm like crying because it's like, wow, I'm 15 enough to be conscious of thought, 14, 15, conscious of thought. And I'm praying that I'm talking to the God I talked to about exams. And God be like, that's the answer. You know this answer. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. It's A, not B, right? And so I was like, God, I thought we were cool. I haven't done anything yet. I know how I feel in my heart. I haven't done anything yet. So if what I'm feeling, if who I am is wrong, just take it. Take it. You can have it like, change me white in the morning. If you can uninstall that chip if that's what it is. And I said, but I need to know that you and I are okay, Lord, because you've always been here for me. So I just need a sign that we're okay. Cried myself to sleep. Got up, went to school the next day, and this is about 14 is what, 8th grade, maybe even going to 9th, because so it was maybe 8th grade, and in the cafeteria. A boy I had liked probably since 4th grade walked up to me and said, "I don't know what it is, but something told me last night to tell you I like you." There's God.
Yep.
Nothing can stop me from now on. And that was literally all I needed. To this day, it's a thing that fortifies me. But that's, we lived in the projects until my 11th grade year of school. And, it was one of those things that DC is so weird because like across from these projects I lived in was a Lutheran church. And then, here we're here, the Lutheran church is here. And here is like these townhouses that rich folk lived in and a condo building that some of the senators had space in. So it was, my experience of not knowing we were poor wasn't rooted in where we lived because inside the apartment, I knew that. I can guarantee you I knew that. But, we got the milk and, meat and government cheese. But I also could walk down to the pier by the arena stage and just kind of look out over the Potomac. I also could walk to all these museums, and my mother trusted me on a Saturday to just go. And sometimes in the summer, I would be responsible for my two younger brothers who hated it because they knew they were going to get an assignment. Like, I'll write me a 3-page paper about, like, I don't know, it's cool. And I was like, you won't like it. So, that kid, for the longest time, I thought I'd be a teacher because I just really love reading. Yeah. See, I really love reading. So.
I often, Brother Kevin, tell people that I have a love affair with the word, with words. So let me drop that on you. You just said it. You love to read, but talk about your relationship with words and your relationship with language. What does language mean to you? What has it done for you? What do you do to express your being through language, through words?
My church family would laugh about this because they often get, a word with 2 or 3 definitions in it inside a sermon so that you understand what you're shouting about. So it's words, it's language, it's words, and the word. It's so funny, it's powerful, wonderful how God has like put me in this entertainment industry thing and in ministry. Literally, many of the moves in it. 93, I became a producer. 93 is when I went to clergy. 2001 is when I did this big interview with Shaq. 2001, I started my production. The levels to it, just moves. 2001 was a Leah access granted, and when I became pastor, I'll tell you about that later. So it's always this kind of saving grace with words. I get a word, hear a word, receive a word. Most sermons come to me, God drops a word in my spirit, then I unpack it, and it's like, okay, so is this a thing that I'm looking for scripture for or a song, right? My sermon this Sunday for my consecration is use me till you use me up. And I've got scripture for it from Ephesians, but I'm going to Bill Withers, right? This all began because I was sitting at home one day in this summer day watching television, and a former talk show host by the name of Mike Douglas from Philadelphia, had actor Robert Mitchum, actor Robert Hedges from a show called Welcome Back, Kotter, and a young singer by the name of Natalie Cole. And I'm like, oh, Nat Cole, that sounds like Nat King Cole's daughter, because my mother was his biggest fan. And so I just knew that somebody black was going to show up on TV at 75. I'm 10, not yet 11. And so I wait for her to come on and sing it, So she comes on and does This Will Be, So here's the amalgamation of it all. This will be, it comes on with that dun 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 dun. And I was like, what's a church song doing on a Tuesday afternoon? And she comes out and sees This Will Be. And she says, I'm so glad that he found me in time. I'm so glad that he rectified my mind. So I went to my dictionary. I was like, rectify, to correct or bring it. Oh, look at that. She used a big word inside a song. Then he sits down to talk to her. I said something about her father, said something about her father. Then he says, now let's talk about your album, Inseparable. I was like, inseparable. Wow. He showed it so I could look it up in the dictionary. And then, I saw it in this book, but because I didn't know the word, I had no construct for it. Because to fix, rectify, I got that. To never ending unbreakable bond, I didn't get that, right? I'm 10. How do you use that in a sentence? Dun 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 dun. Boom. Inseparable. When she said we're like a flower to a tree, like words to a melody of love. There's no way we could break up. There's no words that could make us blow our thing. We're just dun 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 dun, inseparable. I was in love with words in a way I couldn't explain, and in love with Natalie Cole in a way I couldn't explain. Natalie Cole became kind of a North Star. It's like, who is she? And going into the to the library, like to see into any articles on her, because she's a new singer. Here she is in magazine aisles, and so I'm reading interviews where she talked about her father, but she also talked about Ella and Sarah Vaughan and Frank Sinatra. And so I talked to my mother about that, and she let me hear that music. And so it just Natalie Cole broke my brain open, And so hearing her sing Inseparable, hearing Ella Fitzgerald sing Undecided, hearing Ella scat, words became this malleable clay, you know what I mean? To hear Ella sing songs and then just go into a whole scat for a minute. It's like, are these words? Is she speaking another language? What does this mean? So it's like my whole life since then I've been, it's like it's like seeing words float through the air like a butterfly. Like,
Yeah.
you know, it's a thing that shows up when I'm talking to people. They're like, "Did you just come up with that?" And I was like, "Yeah." I remember one time, and I'll say this, I was speaking at an event several years ago, and nobody had spoken to the theme. It was Brown, and it was somebody's birthday party, and they brought a bunch of my books and had me there because I was their partner's favorite author. But you know, he had his partner's favorite band, but nobody had spoken to the theme. So he asked me to say closing words, and I think they thought I was going to preach or pray. But this piece called Brown dropped on me. Brown, the color of my true love skin, brown like chocolate, brown like chocolate, a skin so sweet that every lick is diabetic. It's kinetic. It's connected. You know, and I finished, and I was, you know, like this almost. And then one of the women came up to me. She said, "Oh my God, baby, that was so beautiful. Do you have a copy of that?" And a sister from, you know, good sister. She said, baby, I saw God downloading that into him. And it was the first time I was like, that's what it felt like, because it felt like it came fully formed. I just needed to let it go out my mouth.
And they witnessed it. She witnessed it
in front of people.
Yeah,
that close. It was almost. I don't know what it was, because you know, in spirit, people break out and go to God. That was just them for me, and they was like, there was artists like, and they were like, what's that? I was like, oh. And so it's always been that, you know. Imagine that, you know, that's the Maxwell song I told you about. Words do something to me, you know. I remember when I interviewed Stevie, I talked to him about as and how there was a point when I was 12 when I would only answer to Joey, which was a song on Natalie Cole's second album. There's no pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Two fortunes are deeper than the world is old. We've got to dig up and plant love again. Don't let it vanish into thin air. She's doing all this simile and he, all this metaphor. And here's Stevie over here with as I'll be loving you until the day becomes the night and night the day. Until the season trees just up and fly away. Until the day that 8 times 8 is 4. Until the day that you and I know more. Ain't that loving you? Those two songs in my little 11 to 12-year-old brain gave me permission to let all the words in that dictionary out of my mouth.
Yeah.
So the same boys who wanted to fight will come and say, "I need your help with this English paper. I don't understand this stuff. You going to the library? I'm coming with you." Because it became this kind of, I didn't care anymore.
Right. Yeah. You walked in the gift. You embraced it and lived it and walked in it and let it be.
Let it be. There it is.
Yeah.
Speaking words of wisdom. Let it be.
Yeah. So let me talk about your books. You know, you've written already. I think the notes say over 10 books so far, 4 novels and 5 empowerment tomes, and an autobiography. One of the note questions I have is, what's your inspiration for writing about Black SGL romance? And I asked you before we started, what does SGL mean? And we talked about same gender love romance. So let's talk about that. How do you experience or come to or emerge as a voice, presenting voice in same gender love romance writing?
So my first book was one of those empowerment tomes. There was an experience, if I could share it real quick, where I had left BET because one day my executive producer said, you know, she came to me when they had a meeting that didn't include me at the time I was a talent coordinator. And she was like, they just assume that you're going to get it done, so they don't need you in the meeting debating things, trying to grow stuff, trying to see it from a different way. They want their plan, and then they'll bring it to you. She's like, and if you take a step back, you'll realize how unhappy you probably are here because you've outgrown this space. And I was like, what? It's BET. What else I'm going to do? And so I was like, God, I need a sign. Bev Smith, you remember that? In Our Voice?
Sure, Bev,
Bev Smith was going to Israel. And so I think there was soft whispers about that all over. But I didn't think it had anything to do with me. That was the news department. But I knew it was time to go. I went to my boss, and I weren't having a good relationship because somehow she got in her head that all these new opportunities meant I was after a job because I was able to create stuff and they let me do it. Her boss had given me an award, a special program development award, and said nobody else in this company will ever get this award. And his whole tenure of another, 20 years, nobody else ever did. So it looked like that, but it didn't look like it to me. I just thought I was getting a blessing of doing this amazing job. And so I put in, I was like, if I'm not on the list, and BET was going through this weirdness about doing some layoffs, which was weird because music was doing well, but in other departments in sports
Mm-hmm.
and stuff it wasn't. So they said we're going to do some layoffs, and I went and said, hey, I don't know if I'm on the layoff list, but if I'm not, I want to be. And they were like, what? Nobody in the music department is going to be touched. So did that, and then like literally, Bev said, hey, I'm going to Israel to do a speech on the African Hebrew Israelite. I want you to come with me. She didn't say, do you want to come? I want you to come with me. And so I went to Israel thinking, based on what's going on right now, I go to Dimona, Israel with Bev Smith and her crew. She had me on as a creative consultant. And God talked to me then. I got into the Dead Sea and I'm thinking, I can't swim, right? I had gone to a friend's pool the week before and they, somebody splashed water. I was like, hey, you always do that to the big dude. Like, we can't have fears or I don't like that. And one of my friends there was a swim instructor. She helped me do everything except float on my back. So she got me on a raft and then on an inner tube and then on one of the noodles. But what she helped me to do was get rid of the fear of the water. And I could do everything but float on my back. Fast forward a week later, I'm in Israel. A week later, I'm in Israel. A few days after that, we're in the Dead Sea. And I go to hide because I know everybody here trying to get healing in the water. I'm like, I'll do a pool. I ain't doing the Dead Sea. And two of the ministers came and got me, dragged me into the, brought me into the sea and they said, brother, it's time. Walk me to the sea. I had a conversation with God that if we have time, we'll unpack it. But God was like, I'm here. No matter what's going on, I'm here. And I cried out, hallelujah. And I'm floating. They let me go because first my feet pop up. Then I go. And they just let me drift into the Dead Sea and let me stay there for a while. I'm crying hallelujah. People are chanting it on the beach. God said, write about this. So I wrote Unclutter thinking it would be the only book I'd ever write. Like, I got to write about this thing God tells me about, like, really these little, it was almost like Eric Kopich's Acts of Faith or Yala's Peace in the Valley. It was kind of like a page and a half, little pithy things. All of mine set the song title. I'm thinking that's it. That's it. Now let me go back to Pastor. And probably 2005, a friend of mine, an author by the name of L.M. Ross, wrote a book called A Long Blue Moon by L.M. Ross. My friend Michael Gibson, who always recommends books, we have 5-hour conversation about music, arts, news. We're probably going to talk about this 5 hours. Recommends this book, and I read it, and the end of the book has me in the floor, Al. Just kind of like it took turns, and I felt myself seeing myself in ways that I hadn't even seen myself in Elin Harris's or James Earl Hardy's works because they were so New York based. This was too, but between the three of them, I think he was the end of the trifecta that I needed to unleash this thing in me, the Father, the Parent, and the Holy Ghost. And I fell on the floor, and as I was falling, these two characters came to me, and it was just kind of, I can't write. I don't write. I don't do that. And they kept coming. I would sit down and type stuff, and they would just keep talking. And what Jaded was born out of was the idea that I had this BET career, this politics career, this pastoral. Now I was in this pastoral career because about now it's 5, 6. I've been pastoring for 4 years now, and I'm like, what do I do? And the characters kept coming, and they started to fully realize. And I was like, why are these characters coming to me? And somebody asked me in all of the life I was living that somebody said to me, I don't understand why a man like you is single. So I had to sit with understanding it myself. And I realized that I had busied myself out of love, right? Just but I busied myself to cover heartbreak. So I wrote this story about this guy, Joshua, who after an ugly breakup, so he said, buries himself in work the next 5 years and they're moving successful. And one day, after another success where the company is celebrating, but he's on to the next project, he's in his office. The woman wants to, brings him a plate, and they're like, "You're not coming to the party, not." And he's not gonna be out there. And when he finally kind of comes back to consciousness, party's over. But what brings him back to consciousness is this song. That was just kind of like, "Whoa, what was that?" He wipes tears. It took him in a flashback of the breakup, but it took him in some flash forward to of some of the good times in that same relationship. So he was just kind of like, that hurt. But he couldn't he runs the business, but doesn't know how to run the auto system. He didn't know where the music was coming from. Other music was playing, but he heard the song in his consciousness and wakes up the next day trying to, thinking, I'll just ask what it is on Monday. But he gets out of this house because his best friend is on a trip to Paris that he took him on to grieve his mother after the loss. And so he's just walking around the village and walking around kind of, New York in that late 90s era. And he's trying to find the song, but he can only describe it. His grandfather's introduced him to jazz. So he knows the the husky voice of Carmen McRae and the light voice of little Jimmy Scott. So he's like, was it a man or a woman? He's like, I don't know. I just know it sounded like this. And so he's trying to explain to somebody in Tower Records, tries to explain it to somebody in Colony Records, which is a spot on in Broadway where they used to sell sheet music and stuff. And then he comes back down to the Village on his way home. He gets some lunch. And then he looks across the street and sees Roadhouse Records, where we specialize in the best of the rest, and goes in there and talks to this old man about music. When he walks in, he sees a tall, built, dreadlock, beautiful brother, and it's like, I ain't here for that. Ain't nobody looking over there. And so he's in there talking to the older gentleman about music. And as he's, realizing this is a futile effort, let me just get some new, futile records and go home, the guy he ignored starts to sing the song.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
All right. The guy he's been ignoring, the guy he saw but was stricken by, starts to, he does kind of got piled up records, clearly some sort of artist or producer or something. So he's buying a bunch of records to just listen to. But he's got his headsets on and does this and starts to sing Birds Flying High. You know how I feel. Sun in the Sky. And as he does the breakdown, and he does this thing in his voice that makes him understand why he didn't understand if it was a man or a woman, because it was a sound. And that was it. He's making the sound. And so he goes to walk up to him, and he walks away from the old man, and he goes to walk up to him to ask him, hey, what's that song you sing? But he asked him, who are you? And it begins the journey of, am I open to love? Am I jaded? Because I've had so many conversations, so many Black gay male romance novels, so many SGL conversations, and especially in gay romance. The stories, and the books were always about the struggle of coming out. I was like, some of us just are ourselves, but we still struggle. So I wanted to unpack this story of somebody like, especially, in New York, where, every other brother is beautiful. New York is one of those places where you say, I would never date a Asian Russian, and then somebody comes and you go, you know what I mean? Just of every descent, you New York will shut your mouth. And so it's like, here he is, tall and beautiful and musical, and right here, and you don't know anything about him, but here you are standing in front of him asking, who are you? And he wants to correct himself, but before he can, the guy is already invested. And so I wanted to have that conversation with myself about what love was doing, because people, if you were in my office, you'd see there's a TLC platinum record, there's Tony Braxton, Anita Baker, Vanessa Williams, Scarface, Dave Koz, Maxwell, Mariah Carey, and so people go, oh, you listen to there's a whole Natalie Cole section over here. Your life is wonderful. And then they say, why aren't you? And it's like, so sometimes you can bury yourself so deeply in success that people don't know how to swim to you, right? So he found himself with this dude once we meet Elijah is tall and stunning, and all Black men are stunning. And then, but in his own way, he's confident, and so he presumes everything about him. He must be a player. It's New York. He must have 10 people. He must, like me, be buried in his music. And so when they start the dance, he's got so many moments where he hits a roadblock. He's got to deal with, am I jaded, or am I going to get past this? And when I tell you, brother, the correspondence I got, the first letter I got when I went up on Amazon was from a housewife from California named Deborah. I will always remember her. She's like, this, you've written so differently than the rest of this genre, because I wanted to do soul work. There's 2 points in the book where the lead character has dealt with going to church. One of them, kind of while he was at college, and like, oh, I wish I was still there because I liked that church. And then not knowing there was a church like that in New York, but he didn't go looking for it until he got his heart broken, or so he thought, because he was so ready to be betrayed, so ready to get his heart broken, that this thing happens and he thinks it's heartbreak, and it's not. But I preached a sermon once, brother, that said breakdowns precede breakthroughs. So he had to break down so that he could see where he was being led forward. And he went to the Pastor Unity Fellowship Church movement. The church in D.C. was Interlight. The church in New York was Bishop Zach, but they were both Interlight churches, because I wanted people to leave the experience and go, wait, this place is real? Wait, this love could be real.
Let's talk about church and your role, your emergence, and your discovery of a place in church, and yourself. And you called it, I just grabbed you saying you wanted to do soul work. I think you just said that. Talk about soul work. What does it mean?
again, that young man. So my mom took us to Carroll Baptist Church in Washington, D.C. when I was 10. So that means Gary was 12, David was 8, Douglas was 6. And we go to this church, and it goes from kind of the place we got to go with mama because the boys were getting hard headed, and she didn't want us just being rambunctious on Saturday morning, to this preacher. I remember the Sunday that Reverend Leroy Waldo, who was a blind man, preached like preached like thunder and lightning. But he also was a musician, so that when he got laid down, and he had also had a group in the church called the Waldo Singers. And they sang this song called "He's Already Done What He Said He Would Do" by the Roberta Martin Singers. And I watched this rather dignified, stunning, light-skinned black woman with salt and hers wasn't salt and pepper because her natural hair was blonde. So, gold and silver hair, I used to say on Dot had. She was really dignified. She would kiss them both. She would kiss you on the cheek, hi baby. But she wasn't, big mama. She wasn't. And when she got up with them to sing "He's Already Done What He Said He Would Do," she would short-footed start to bounce. And I was like, what? I saw her trans God has done. And she would flick her hair just a little bit, a little 1977, and so to see God on somebody like that, before I noticed a shout, I noticed her transformation.
You witnessed it.
And I called him, he heard me, and he gave me peace of mind. He's my shepherd and my God, and it goes with me all the time. I don't worry, I don't fret, for God has never failed me yet. I keep on trusting. His word is true. He's already done what he said he would do. To this day, as senior pastor of Unity Fellowship Church, New Ark, we close every prayer. But that is why, without one doubt, while we scream and we shout, that we keep on trusting. For your word is true. You've already done what you said you would do. And every once in a while, like once a year, on my birthday or anniversary, the choir breaks out that song, and it wipes me out every time. Because to see, when I talk about soul work, and this is, I don't know if I've ever seen and said this before, like, to see God land on somebody. I've been in churches and seen somebody like shouting and looking at me like, the lesbian woman, like, I didn't know this until they come in running and they looking like, what's happening to me? You can see it inside show up on the outside. And so this dance of the word, this dance of listening to a song and hear the lyrics, so people, I wonder what caught me with Natalie and why I fell so deeply in love with Natalie Cole until I remember that the Reverend Marvin Yancey wrote, "This will be an everlasting love.
Yeah.
This will be the one I've waited for. This will be the first time anyone has loved me. I'm so glad you found me in time. And I'm so glad that you rectified my mind." I was like, wait a minute. That's why black people thought that was a church song. It is. It could be if we would let it, right? And so I started grabbing. So we used to call it transfiguration in my church. Where we would grab songs and I'd be like, instead of, move, devil, get out the way. And I was like, who says that? Ludicrous. Isn't that a ludicrous statement to make? It's ludicrous to say, move, get out my way. But if we mean power, then we mean power. If we mean nothing shall be able to separate you from the love of God, we got to say that. And sometimes you can't find that. I had to stop people from reading King James. I was like, stop read this because you think it's the holiest version. Jesus didn't speak English. This is Shakespeare.
That's right.
So get a version you can understand.
Yep.
Oh my God. Being in rooms, brother, where we're in Bible study, we read for the first time Eve eats from the forbidden tree of fruit of the tree, and then gives some to the man who was with her. And women were like, "What do you mean? Adam was there? I've never heard that." That's like, "Well, why'd you never read it?" Because why would you want to read your own condemnation? So to preach Sodom and Gomorrah to a room full of same gender loving, previously church bruised folk, and it's like we're going to the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, and they're like, "Pastor, no, you're not. You've got to." But you got to take it back. You got to see what's going on in here. And if you don't understand that they call in Sodom and Gomorrah the place where all the gays were, but Lot offered his daughters to these gays, then you don't understand what it means to offer steak to vegans. I never thought. And so it's been a lifetime of ministry that included people saying, "I never thought about it like that." Some cases I hadn't either. God had to drop it on my spirit. God, let me tell you something real quick. God dropped in my spirit this sermon that I printed out. My son, my now adopted son, is holding it in his hand. He's read it. He wasn't reading for the life. I don't know why I wouldn't read. And so that guy was like, that's cute. You get ready to preach something else. And I remember preaching this sermon about nevertheless. The circumstance doesn't look like what it should. The moment doesn't look like what it should. The sequence of events doesn't look like what they should, but nevertheless. And so I'm preaching out of my mouth. Can you hear me out? I'm preaching out of my mouth while God is talking in my ear and not about what I'm preaching. God said, look at that boy. And I was like, okay, I'm preaching. I'm literally like, I'm busy here. He got, look at that boy. And I said, what's happening? What's happening? What's happening? And God said, when did I give him to you? And I was like, when did you ask me for that boy? I was like, I don't know. I remember the Saturday I came in choir rehearsal.
And you're still preaching, you're talking and having this other conversation.
God in my head.
Yeah.
Talking to the people. And
yeah.
I'm saying to God in this head conversation, I remember the day I first saw him. I remember the first day we first met. I remember his mother's partner saying, or saying he needs you. He needs a father figure. And I'm like, well, we're his siblings because he had a brother and sister who were from her marriage. He was not. I was like, well, he don't need to be with y'all on the Saturday. I was like, I'm going to the movies. Any Saturday he don't want to be with y'all or y'all need a break, he can come with me. I'm going to movies. He'd be safe. So that was Memorial Day weekend, 4th of July weekend. They call and say, hey, we wanted to go to a picnic. The kids are with their father. Can G stay with you? Sure. We go to the movie, and we do that for the rest of the summer. He's calling, I was like, it's weird to be walking around the mall with him calling me pastor. I was like, so just call me Dadster. It felt like mine, right? And so I'm thinking, is that it? Is that what you're talking about, God? And that led to his adoption. Over here, God says, tell me when you asked me for the boy. And I'm like, I didn't ask you for him then because it's like, mama popping you in the behind while I'm preaching. Nevertheless, it doesn't make any sense. Nevertheless. So God's trying to give me the greatest example of this for me. So while we're unpacking the story, God said, tell me when you asked me for this boy. And I was like, okay, I remember asking you for a child. I remember telling you I was ready to be a parent. When was that? The year I turned, it was the year I turned 25. I remember now because I graduated college. I still have a good government job. I was making good money because we look like we from an era where if you made your age as your salary, we good. So I was, for Christmas, that's when I got to be a little bougie. I would go to the department store, buy my family's gifts, take them to the gift wrapping section because it was free, get them gift wrap, sit in the restaurant and have a meal with myself, and then get a cab home with my gift wrap bag. It felt very black. It felt very, very, very talented. Very much negrosity,
That's right.
Audacity of being black. So I'm in the cab that day with all the bags over here, and it's snowing, and I'm looking out the window, and I remember saying to God, I'm ready because now I feel like I'm spending money. You've given me an extra portion. It would be nice to pass it on. I'm from a big family. I got nieces and nephews. I got cousins, and it's just like I'm from a big family. So I know I'm not going to have a family. So if he comes with kids or some lesbian couple asks me to do whatever it is you're going to put in my space to bring the child that you would have me parent, I am ready. And I am preaching. Nevertheless, God is doing things with it. It makes no sense. And God says to me, when did you pray that prayer? I was like, it was the year I turned 25. I remember that. I remember that because 25 was the first significant birthday. 21, I turned in London. And, 18 didn't matter. 21, I turned in London without family. 25, here I was in my city, in my world. It was a big deal. And God said, come on, boy. Come on. When was it? I was like, it was the year I turned 25. God said, what day was that? I don't know. While I'm preaching, so it gets harder and harder and harder. Like it's hot and hot and hot. What day was it? God said, what day was that? It was the year. Oh my God, it was Christmas Eve because we had a budget due, so I couldn't go shopping till the last minute. God said, now what day was that? It was Christmas Eve. What day was that? It was, oh my God, it was December 24th, 1989. My son's birthday, December 24th. Al, like, whoo, at the pulpit, I collapsed because God was like, there it is. Nevertheless, pow. And I'm in full preach, and God went, pow.
There it is.
I said everything they needed to hear, then God needed to finish it, and I was out. Like I came through, his mother was out, he was saying it over to both of us, and I was like, dear.
What a story, man. What an experience.
Yeah, so
what
that's when I think I know God to be real. In that moment, you're going to get this. You're going to get this. Nevertheless, you want to talk about some nevertheless? Here we go. So.
What's when you were out for a second, your chair, what kind of chair are you sitting on? That's interesting. What is that?
Just, here, you mean here?
Yeah. Just a chair.
Yeah, it's one of those. It's one of those that I wanted a more comfortable chair. It's got a little lumbar thing in the back, so you can move your back is there in the middle of your back. That's all.
Okay. Look like a pilot seat or something like that.
This is a gaming chair, everybody.
Gaming chair, okay.
So they can sit in these for hours. And so as a writer, it's good to have space where I can sit in it for hours.
We got a cover, one of your covers, I think, Envy.
Envy's the sequel to Jaded, yeah.
Let's show that, and we got about a minute left. Talk about that in particular.
So, in so many of these stories, James Earl Hardy, Elon Harris, there were sequels, and people came to me, what's the sequel? What's the sequel? What's the sequel? And I was like, I ain't gonna be no sequel. That was the story. And 5 years, almost to the date, the couple started to speak again. And so it's 5 years later, and it literally picks up 5 years later. And so Joshua and Elijah are a couple now, but now an outside force, seeing who they are, decides that it deserves one of them more than they deserve each other. It tries to undermine their love, unbeknownst to them. Hello, somebody. It ain't nothing crazy than somebody being jealous of you and you don't even know it. So it becomes, so it's envy, the darkest shade of green. Because sometimes people don't know how to be happy, like happy for you, happy for love, happy for circumstances. I always say be very careful of people who don't know how to share your joy with you. Like when you do something, if you say, Brian, I got nominated for an Emmy, man, it's coming. NAACP award is coming. If you said that to me, I would be happy because if we had this conversation, God connected us for a reason. So something's getting ready to happen. So it's the unpacking of where Elijah's career is now. He was a producer and he's moved into being the artist now. Joshua's moving up and operating still his company. And I tried to do it with them both being successful and still dealing with struggle, because I think because we fantasize so much, we don't stop and give people tools to unpack struggles. And that's why I call it soul work, because I preached a sermon once called Struggle Up. You're going to struggle, but struggle up. Get up from the thing better than you fell down, because the enemy wants you to fall down in the exact same spot.
Brother Kevin, we're out of time. Okay. What a wonderful conversation, but let's do it again. I'm loving this conversation.
Anytime.
We just touched the surface, I think, but I am so enjoying your testimony, your story. So I thank you, and I want to learn more.
I enjoy I'm looking at you going, this dude, if he lived here, would be my friend. Look at our dog. Yeah. And that unpacks a different conversation. So anytime.
All right. I'm here. Brother, thank you.
Thank you, King.
All right. I'm Al McFarlane. This is The Conversation with Al McFarlane. What a wonderful conversation with Brother Kevin E. Taylor. Tell you what, we'll get back together and continue this conversation. And we'll see you next time. Take care.